The wind never stopped in Dodge City, Kansas. It carried dust, secrets, and the smell of cattle from the stockyards that stretched beyond the horizon. Jack Callahan had grown accustomed to its constant whisper as he made his evening camp just outside town, where the prairie met the last flickering lights of civilization. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story." At 43, Jack was a man carved from solitude. His weathered face told stories he'd never speak aloud, and his steel-gray eyes held shadows deeper than the Kansas night. The townspeople knew him as the loner cowboy, a drifter who took odd jobs, kept to himself, and never stayed anywhere long enough to form attachments. It was safer that way. Safer for everyone. Thunder, his black stallion, snorted softly as Jack unsaddled him near a small grove of cottonwoods. The horse had been his only companion for 3 years now, ever since. Jack pushed the memory away. Some doors were better left closed. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, running his hand along Thunder's neck. "Just another night under the stars." He was building his fire when he heard it, a rustling in the brush that wasn't quite the wind. Jack's hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 at his hip. In his experience, nothing good came from unexpected visitors after dark. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd faced down his share of trouble. Silence. Then slowly a figure emerged from the shadows, small, trembling, barely more than a silhouette against the dying light. It was a boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with torn clothes hanging off his thin frame like rags on a scarecrow. His feet were bare and bleeding, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Jack's hand moved away from his gun. Whatever this child was running from, it wasn't Jack Callahan he needed to fear. "Easy there, son," Jack said softly, the way he might speak to a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy took a hesitant step forward, then another. In the firelight, Jack could see the desperation in his eyes, the hollow look of someone who'd been running on empty for too long. "Mister," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. I'm so hungry." "Please, do you have any food?" Jack's chest tightened. He'd seen plenty of hardship in his 43 years, but there was something about a hungry child that cut straight through all his carefully built defenses. "Of course, son. Come sit by the fire?" Jack gestured to a spot near the flames. "You look like you could use some warming up, too." The boy approached cautiously, like a wild animal that had been hurt too many times to trust easily. Jack pulled out his saddlebags and retrieved some jerky, hardtack, and a small tin of beans he'd been saving. "Here," Jack said, handing the boy the jerky. "Start with this. Slow. Now, you don't want to make yourself sick." The boy's eyes widened as if he'd been handed gold. He tore into the jerky with desperate hunger, and Jack had to gently remind him to slow down twice. While the boy ate, Jack studied him more carefully. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, there was something refined about the child's features, something that suggested he hadn't always lived rough. "What's your name, son?" Jack asked, stirring the beans over the fire. "Eli," the boy said between bites. "Eli Harper." "Well, Eli Harper, I'm Jack Callahan." "You can call me Jack." He ladled some beans onto a tin plate and handed it over. "Now, I don't mean to pry, but what's a boy your age doing out here alone? Where's your family?" Eli's hand stilled on the plate. For a moment, Jack thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so quiet Jack had to lean forward to hear it, the boy said, "I don't have family anymore." "Not really." "Where did you come from, Eli? How long have you been walking?" The boy looked up then, and Jack saw something in those young eyes that made his blood run cold to terror so deep and primal that it seemed to reach right into Jack's soul and squeeze. "I came from Gallows farm," Eli whispered, his voice trembling. "And they're still there." Jack felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the Kansas wind. He'd been through these parts many times over the years, and he'd never heard of any place called Gallows farm. But the way the boy said it, like he was speaking the name of hell itself, made Jack's instincts scream that something was very, very wrong. "Gallows farm?" Jack repeated carefully. "Where is that, son?" "How far did you walk?" Eli's whole body began to shake. I ran for 2 days, maybe 3, I don't know. I just kept running until I couldn't anymore." Tears started streaming down his dirt-stained cheeks. "They'll come looking for me. They always come looking." "Who will come looking, Eli? The men, Mr. Reed's men?" "They don't like it when we try to leave." Jack's jaw tightened. "We? There are other children there?" Eli nodded miserably. "Lots of us, but we're not supposed to talk about it. We're not supposed to tell anyone about the farm. Mr. Reed says bad things happen to children who tell secrets." Every instinct Jack had developed over years of surviving on the frontier was now screaming danger. This wasn't just a lost child, this was something much darker, and the name Reed. Jack had heard whispers of a powerful rancher in these parts, a man whose influence reached into every corner of the territory. "Eli," Jack said gently, "I need you to listen to me. You're safe now. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. But I need to know, what kind of place is this farm? What were you doing there?" The boy's eyes darted around the camp as if expecting shadowy figures to emerge from the darkness. "We worked," he said finally, "all day, every day. In the fields, in the house, wherever they needed us. And if we didn't work hard enough, or if we tried to run." He touched his arm, and Jack noticed for the first time the faded bruises there. Jack's hands clenched into fists. In all his years, through all the violence and hardship he'd witnessed, nothing made his blood boil like the abuse of children. "How did you end up there, son? You remember your life before the farm?" Eli's brow furrowed in concentration. I think I had a mama once. She was sick, and then some men came and said they would take care of me. They said I was going to a good place where I'd have food and a bed." His voice broke. "But it wasn't good." "It was never good." Jack stared into the fire, his mind racing. This sounded like some kind of organized operation taking vulnerable children, probably orphans or those from desperate families, and using them for labor. And if this Reed character was involved, it meant the operation had protection, maybe even official sanction. "Eli," Jack said carefully, "how many other children are at this farm?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe 20, 30. They keep us separated most of the time. But I've seen them in the fields, in the dormitory at night. Some are really little, maybe 6 or 7. Some are older, like me." Jack's stomach turned. "And the adults? How many of them are there?" "Mr. Reed comes sometimes, but mostly it's his foreman, Garrett, and maybe 6 or 7 other men. They carry guns and ... quotes." Eli shuddered. "They're not nice men, Mr. Jack." Thunder whinnied softly from where he was tethered, and both Jack and Eli looked up sharply. In the distance, Jack could hear the faint sound of hoofbeats, still far off, but getting closer. Eli's face went white with terror. "They found me," he whispered. "Oh God, they found me." Jack was already moving, kicking dirt over the fire and grabbing his gear. "Easy, son. We don't know who that is yet. But just in case, we're going to take a little ride into town." "No!" Eli grabbed Jack's arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand. If they catch me, they'll... And if they know you helped me..." The boy's eyes filled with a terror so profound that Jack felt his own heart skip a beat. The hoofbeats were getting closer now, definitely multiple riders, moving with purpose through the night. Jack made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Eli Harper," he said, looking the boy straight in the eyes, "I don't know what kind of hell you've been through, but I promise you this, nobody is taking you back there. Not while I'm breathing." As Jack lifted the boy onto Thunder's back and swung up behind him, one thought echoed in his mind. He'd spent 3 years running from his past, but maybe it was time to stop running and start fighting. The hoofbeats were almost upon them now, and in the darkness ahead lay Dodge City and whatever answers awaited them there. The back streets of Dodge City at midnight were a maze of shadows and whispered secrets. Jack guided Thunder through the narrow alleys behind the main thoroughfare, keeping to the darkness while Eli clung to him like a lifeline. The boy hadn't spoken since they'd fled the camp, but Jack could feel him trembling against his back. They'd lost the riders somewhere in the maze of cattle pens on the outskirts of town, but Jack knew it was only temporary. Men like that didn't give up easily, especially when they were hunting something or someone valuable. "Where are we going?" Eli whispered as Jack brought Thunder to a stop behind the schoolhouse. "To find someone who might have answers," Jack replied, dismounting and helping the boy down. "Someone I trust?" The schoolhouse was a modest wooden building that doubled as the town's unofficial community center. Jack had met its teacher, Clara Bennett, several months ago, when he'd helped repair the roof after a particularly vicious storm. She was one of the few people in Dodge City who'd looked at him without suspicion or fear, just honest curiosity and kindness. More importantly, Clara had a reputation for helping children in need, and she knew everyone in the territory. If anyone would have information about missing children or mysterious farms, it would be her. Jack knocked softly on the door of the small apartment attached to the back of the schoolhouse. After a moment, he heard footsteps, and Clara's voice called out cautiously, "Who's there?" "It's Jack Callahan, Miss Bennett. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I need your help." "It's about a child?" The door opened to reveal Clara Bennett, a woman in her early 30s with intelligent brown eyes and auburn hair pinned back in a practical bun. She wore a simple nightgown covered by a heavy shawl, and her face showed concern rather than annoyance at being awakened. "Jack, what's wrong?" Her eyes fell on Eli, and her expression immediately shifted to one of maternal protectiveness. "Oh my goodness, who is this?" "This is Eli Harper," Jack said. "He's in trouble, Clara. Bad trouble. And I think it's bigger than just him." Clara stepped aside without hesitation. "Come in, both of you. Eli, you look exhausted. When did you last eat?" "I gave him some food at my camp," Jack said as they entered the small but tidy living space. "But he's been running for days." Clara immediately went to her kitchen area and began preparing tea and gathering what food she had. "Running from what?" she asked, though Jack could see in her eyes that she was already putting pieces together. "Tell her, Eli," Jack said gently, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Miss Bennett helps children. She's safe." Eli looked up at Clara with those haunted eyes that had already broken Jack's heart twice over. "I came from Gallows farm," he said quietly. Do you know about it?" Clara's hand stilled on the teapot. The color drained from her face, and she exchanged a meaningful look with Jack that sent a chill down his spine. "You know something?" Jack said. It wasn't a question. Clara set down the teapot and knelt in front of Eli, taking his small hands in hers. "Sweetheart, I need you to be very brave and tell me everything you can remember about this farm. Can you do that?" For the next hour, Eli recounted his story in halting, painful detail. He told them about being taken from an orphanage in Topeka when he was 8, about the long journey to a remote farm where children worked from dawn to dusk, about the dormitories where they slept on straw mattresses, about the punishments for those who disobeyed or tried to escape. Clara's face grew paler with each detail, and Jack noticed her hands shaking as she took notes. "Eli," Clara said gently when he finished, "this man you mentioned, Mr. Reed. Did you ever hear his full name?" "Silas Reed," Eli said. "The other men were scared of him. Even Garrett, the foreman, got nervous when Mr. Reed came around." Clara and Jack exchanged another look, and this time Jack saw something that made his blood run cold: recognition and fear. "Clara," Jack said quietly, "we need to talk, privately." Clara nodded and settled Eli on the small sofa with a blanket and a cup of warm milk. "Rest now, sweetheart. You're safe here." She led Jack to the far corner of the room, where they could speak in low voices without being overheard. "You know who Silas Reed is?" Jack said. Clara nodded grimly. "He's one of the most powerful men in Kansas. Owns thousands of acres of ranch land, has connections in the territorial government, even has influence with the railroad companies. But Jack—" She paused, glancing toward Eli. "There have been rumors for years." "What kind of rumors?" "Missing children. Families who lose children and are told they died of illness or accident, but the bodies are never found. Orphanages that claim children were adopted by good families, but no one ever sees them again." Clara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I've been trying to track these cases for 2 years now. I have a list of over 40 children who've disappeared in the last 5 years alone." Jack felt his stomach drop. 40, maybe more. And they all have one thing in common: they were all vulnerable. Orphans, children from desperately poor families, children whose disappearance wouldn't cause too much of a stir. "And you think Reed is behind it?" "I think Reed is involved, but I don't think he's the only one. This is too big, too organized for one man. There has to be a network, people in the orphanages, maybe even law enforcement." Jack ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "We need to get Eli somewhere safe and figure out our next move." "Jack," Clara said, her voice heavy with worry, "if what Eli says is true, if there really are 20 or 30 children at this farm, We can't just hide him and hope for the best. Those other children are still there. I know. Jack looked over at Eli, who had fallen asleep on the sofa despite his fear. But we need help. This is bigger than what you and I can handle alone. There is someone, Clara said thoughtfully. Marshal Tom Brewer? He's new to Dodge City, transferred here from Wichita about 6 months ago. He's got a reputation for being honest, and he doesn't owe any favors to the local power structure. Can we trust him? I think so. But Jack, if we're wrong about him, if he's connected to Reed somehow ... then we're all dead, Jack finished grimly. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Both Jack and Clara froze, and Jack's hand instinctively moved to his gun. Miss Bennett? A man's voice called from outside. This is Marshal Brewer. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need to ask you some questions. Clara's eyes widened, and she looked at Jack with a mixture of fear and determination. It's now or never, she whispered. Jack nodded and moved to wake Eli gently. Son, we need you to be very quiet and very brave. There's a lawman here, and we're going to find out if he's one of the good ones. Clara opened the door to reveal Marshal Tom Brewer, a tall, lean man in his 40s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore his badge with the kind of quiet authority that suggested he'd earned it the hard way. Marshal, Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady, what can I do for you? Brewer's eyes took in the scene Clara in her nightgown and shawl, Jack standing protectively near a young boy who was clearly not from around town. I've had reports of riders searching the outskirts of town tonight, Brewer said carefully. Men asking questions about a missing boy. I thought you might know something about it, Miss Bennett, given your interest in child welfare. Jack stepped forward, making a decision that could save them all or doom them. Marshal, my name is Jack Callahan. This boy came to me tonight asking for food. He told me he escaped from a place called Gallows farm, and he's terrified that men are coming to take him back. Brewer's expression didn't change, but Jack caught a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, maybe, or concern. Gallows farm, Brewer repeated slowly. That's an interesting name. Mind if I come in? I think we need to have a longer conversation. Clara stepped aside, and Brewer entered, closing the door behind him. He looked down at Eli with the kind of gentle expression that gave Jack hope. Son, Brewer said, kneeling to Eli's level, I'm Marshal Brewer. I'm here to help. Can you tell me about this farm? Eli looked to Jack, who nodded encouragingly. In a small, frightened voice, Eli began to tell his story again. As he spoke, Jack watched Brewer's face carefully. The marshal's expression grew darker with each detail, and by the time Eli finished, Brewer was clenching his jaw with barely controlled anger. Son, Brewer said finally, you're very brave for telling us this. And I want you to know that I believe you. You do? Eli asked, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time. I do, because you're not the first child to tell me about Silas Reed and his operation. Brewer stood and looked at Jack and Clara. I've been investigating Reed for months, but I haven't been able to get close enough to gather evidence. Until now. What do you mean? Clara asked. Brewer's smile was grim but determined. I mean, we finally have a witness. And if we're smart about this, we might just be able to bring down the whole operation. Outside, the wind continued to howl through the streets of Dodge City, carrying with it the promise of a storm both in the sky and in the lives of everyone in that small room. Dawn broke gray and cold over Dodge City, but inside the schoolhouse, the atmosphere was electric with tension and purpose. Marshal Brewer had spent the night questioning Eli gently but thoroughly, and the picture that emerged was even darker than any of them had imagined. According to Eli's description, Brewer said, spreading a hand-drawn map across Clara's kitchen table, Gallows Farm is located about 30 miles northeast of here, in a valley that's hidden from the main roads. It's perfect for hiding an operation like this. Jack studied the map, his jaw tight with determination. How many men did you say were there, Eli? Maybe 8 or 9, Eli replied, his voice stronger now after a night of rest and the knowledge that adults were finally listening to him. But they have guns, and they know the land really well. And the children, Clara said softly. You said there were about 30? Eli nodded. Some as young as 6? The older ones, like me, we tried to take care of the little ones, but... His voice trailed off, and Jack saw the weight of responsibility that no child should have to carry. Brewer leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. I've been tracking Reed's operation for 6 months now, ever since I transferred here from Wichita. I had suspicions, but no proof. The man has connections everywhere, judges, politicians, even some federal marshals. So how do we stop him? Jack asked. Carefully, Brewer replied. If we move too fast or alert the wrong people, those children could disappear forever. Reed has the resources to relocate his entire operation if he feels threatened. Clara had been quiet for several minutes, but now she spoke up. There's something else we need to consider. I've been corresponding with teachers and social workers in other territories. This isn't just happening here in Kansas. She pulled out a folder filled with letters and newspaper clippings. I've documented similar disappearances in Colorado, Nebraska, even as far as California. Children vanishing from orphanages and poor families, always with official explanations that don't quite add up. Jack felt his blood run cold. You're saying this is bigger than just one farm? I'm saying this might be a network that spans multiple territories. And if that's true, then Silas Reed isn't the head of this operation. He's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Brewer studied the documents Clara had spread out. This changes everything. If we're dealing with a multi-territorial operation, we need federal involvement. But that also means we can't trust local law enforcement. So what do we do? Jack asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Those children are suffering right now while we sit here talking. We gather evidence, Brewer said firmly. Solid, undeniable evidence that will hold up in federal court. And we do it without alerting Reed or his people? Eli looked up from where he'd been quietly listening. I can help, he said. I know the layout of the farm, where they keep the children, where the guards are stationed. Absolutely not, Jack said immediately. You're not going anywhere near that place. But I know things you don't, Eli insisted. I know which buildings are which. I know the guards' routines. I know where they keep the records. Records? Brewer leaned forward with interest. Mr. Garrett, the foreman, he keeps books. Names, ages, where each child came from. I saw them once when I was cleaning his office. He writes everything down. Clara and Brewer exchanged glances. Those records would be exactly what we need, Clara said. Then we get them, Jack said. But Eli stays here, safe. Jack, Brewer said carefully, I understand your protective instincts, but the boy is right. We need someone who knows the layout, the routines. And if we're going to get those children out safely, we need inside information. I won't risk his life. And I won't abandon those other children, Eli said with a determination that surprised all three adults. They're my friends. Some of them are like little brothers and sisters to me. I can't just leave them there. Jack looked into the boy's eyes and saw something that reminded him painfully of himself at that age, a fierce loyalty and a willingness to sacrifice for others. It was exactly the kind of courage that had gotten Jack into trouble before, and exactly the kind of courage that had also saved lives. There might be a way, Brewer said slowly. A way to use Eli's knowledge without putting him in direct danger. I'm listening, Jack said. We send in a small reconnaissance team, just Jack and me. Eli provides detailed information about the layout and routines, but he stays here with Clara. We gather evidence, document what we find, and then we bring in federal marshals for the rescue operation. Clara nodded. I can keep Eli safe here, and I can also continue reaching out to my contacts in other territories. If we're going to expose this network, we need to coordinate with law enforcement across multiple jurisdictions. Jack was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks. Finally, he looked at Eli. Son, if we do this, you have to promise me something. You stay here with Miss Bennett, and you don't try to be a hero. Can you do that? Eli nodded solemnly. I promise, Mr. Jack, but you have to promise me something too. What's that? Promise me you'll get them out, all of them. Even the little ones who are too scared to talk. Jack felt his throat tighten. I promise, Eli, we'll get them all out. The next few hours were spent in careful planning. Eli drew detailed maps of the farm layout, marking guard positions, work schedules, and the locations of the dormitories. He explained the daily routines, when the children worked, when they ate, when they slept. The guards change shifts at midnight and noon, Eli explained, sketching guard towers on his map. And Sunday mornings, most of the men go into the nearest town for supplies and things. That's when there are the fewest guards. How far is the nearest town? Brewer asked. About 10 miles south. It's called Millerville, just a trading post and a saloon, really. Jack and Brewer studied the maps and schedules, formulating their approach. They would ride out that evening, scout the farm under cover of darkness, and, if possible, retrieve the records that Eli had mentioned. "Remember," Brewer cautioned, "we're gathering evidence, not mounting a rescue." "Not yet. We need to be smart about this." As the sun began to set, Jack checked his weapons and gear one final time. Clara had prepared supplies for the journey, and Eli had gone over the farm layout once more. "Jack," Clara said as he prepared to leave, "be careful. If something happens to you, ... "Nothing's going to happen," Jack said, though he knew better than to make promises he might not be able to keep. "Just keep Eli safe. And if we're not back by tomorrow night, take him and get as far from here as possible." Eli grabbed Jack's hand as he headed for the door. "Mr. Jack, there's something else I didn't tell you before." Jack knelt down to the boy's level. "What is it, son?" "Some of the children. They've been there for years. They don't even remember their real names anymore. And the little ones, they think the farm is normal. They don't know there's anything else." Jack felt his heart break a little more. "We'll help them remember, Eli. We'll help them all remember what it's like to be free." As Jack and Marshal Brewer rode out into the gathering darkness, the weight of their mission settled heavily on Jack's shoulders. Somewhere out there in the Kansas prairie, 30 children were going to sleep another night in captivity, not knowing that help was finally coming. But as they rode toward Gallows farm, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were riding into something much more dangerous than they realized. The wind carried whispers of secrets that ran deeper than any of them had imagined, and in the distance, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Thunder's hooves beat a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth, and with each mile, Jack felt himself getting closer to a confrontation that would either free those children or destroy everyone who tried to help them. The truth was waiting for them at Gallows farm, hidden beneath the endless Kansas prairie, and Jack Callahan was determined to uncover it, no matter what the cost. The moon was a silver sliver in the star-filled sky when Jack and Marshal Brewer reached the ridge overlooking Gallows farm. What they saw below made Jack's blood run cold and his resolve burn even hotter. The farm sprawled across a hidden valley, much larger than Eli's descriptions had suggested. Multiple buildings dotted the landscape: dormitories, work sheds, a main house, and what appeared to be a processing facility of some kind. Lanterns flickered in guard towers, and even at this late hour, Jack could see small figures moving between buildings under armed escort. "Jesus," Brewer whispered, lowering his spyglass. "There are more children down there than we thought. Maybe 50 or 60? Jack studied the layout through his own field glasses, comparing it to Eli's hand-drawn maps. The boy had been remarkably accurate, but the scale of the operation was staggering. "There," Jack pointed to a building near the center of the compound. "That's got to be the administrative building Eli mentioned. If those records exist, they'll be in there. Look at the work schedule," Brewer said grimly. "They've got children working in shifts around the clock. What kind of operation requires that much labor?" Jack focused his glasses on the processing facility and felt his stomach turn. "Manufacturing. They're not just using these children for farm work, they're running some kind of production line." As they watched, a group of older children, maybe 12 to 14 years old, emerged from the facility carrying crates toward a loading dock where several wagons waited. Even from this distance, Jack could see the exhaustion in their movements. "We need to get closer," Jack said, "and we need to see what's in those crates." They left their horses tied in a grove of trees and made their way down the ridge on foot, using the shadows and natural cover to approach the compound. The guards were positioned to watch for threats coming up the main road, not for anyone approaching from the high ground. As they got closer, Jack could hear children's voices, tired and frightened. His jaw clenched with anger as he recognized the sound of kids trying to comfort each other in whispered conversations. "The guard rotation," Brewer whispered, checking his pocket watch. "Eli said they change at midnight." Sure enough, at exactly midnight, Jack watched as guards emerged from the main house and began walking toward the towers while others descended. During the brief transition, there was a gap in coverage near the administrative building. "Now," Jack whispered. They moved quickly and silently across the open ground, reaching the administrative building just as the new guards settled into their positions. Jack tried the door locked, but not with anything his lock-picking skills couldn't handle. another skill from his past that he'd hoped never to use again. Inside, the building was dark except for moonlight streaming through windows. Jack lit a small candle and shielded it carefully as they searched for the office Eli had described. They found it on the second floor, a room filled with filing cabinets, ledgers, and correspondence. Brewer immediately began photographing documents with a small camera he'd brought, while Jack searched through the files. What they found was worse than either had imagined. "Jack," Brewer whispered urgently, "look at this." He handed Jack a ledger that contained detailed records of every child in the facility, names, ages, origins, and something that made Jack's blood boil: purchase prices. "They're selling them," Jack said, his voice tight with rage. "These children aren't just laborers, they're merchandise." The ledger showed transactions with buyers across multiple territories. Some children were sold for agricultural labor, others for domestic service, and some, the youngest and most vulnerable, for purposes that the records didn't specify but that Jack could guess at with sickening certainty. "There's more," Brewer said, holding up a stack of correspondence. Letters from orphanages, from government officials, from people in positions of trust. This network goes all the way to Washington. Jack photographed page after page of evidence while Brewer kept watch. They found shipping manifests, financial records, and most damning of all, a list of clients that included some of the most prominent names in the territory. "We've got enough," Brewer said after they'd been inside for nearly an hour. "We need to get out of here," and a shout from outside cut him off, then another. Lanterns began moving rapidly around the compound, and Jack heard the unmistakable sound of men calling orders. "They know we're here," Jack said, quickly gathering the most important documents. "We need to move." They made it to the first floor before they heard footsteps on the porch outside. Jack blew out the candle, and they pressed themselves against the wall as the front door opened. "Check every room," a gruff voice commanded. "Someone's been in here." Jack and Brewer exchanged glances in the darkness. They were trapped on the second floor with armed men between them and the exit. Then Jack heard something that made his decision for him a child's voice, crying out in fear from somewhere in the compound. One of the guards had apparently decided to take out his frustration on the nearest available target. "I'm going to create a distraction," Jack whispered to Brewer. "When I do, you get out of here with those documents. Get them to the federal marshals." "Jack, no, we stick together. Those children need someone to speak for them. You're the law, you can make sure this evidence gets to the right people." "I'm just a drifter with a past I'd rather forget." Before Brewer could argue further, Jack was moving. He slipped out a back window and dropped to the ground, then made his way toward the dormitories where the children were housed. What he found there broke his heart and steeled his resolve. Children as young as 6 were huddled together in overcrowded rooms, sleeping on straw mattresses, their faces gaunt with hunger and marked by exhaustion. But it was what he found in the smallest dormitory that made his decision final. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, was sitting alone in a corner, rocking back and forth and humming a lullaby to herself. She reminded him so much of his own daughter, the daughter he'd lost 3 years ago, the reason he'd become the loner cowboy in the first place. Jack had failed to save his own child from the fever that took her. He wouldn't fail these children. He began moving through the dormitories, gently waking the older children and explaining who he was. Word spread quickly through whispered conversations, and soon Jack found himself surrounded by dozens of young faces filled with hope and fear in equal measure. "Listen to me," Jack said quietly to the group of older children who had gathered around him. "Help is coming. Federal marshals will be here soon. But right now, I need you to help me get the little ones ready to move." "Are you really going to get us out of here?" asked a girl who couldn't have been more than 12, but who spoke with the weariness of someone much older. "I promise you," Jack said, looking into her eyes with all the conviction he could muster. "Every single one of you is going home." And the next hour was a carefully orchestrated miracle. While Jack organized the children, Brewer had managed to escape the compound and ride hard for Dodge City. By dawn, he was back with a force of federal marshals who had been secretly investigating the child trafficking network for months. The raid on Gallows farm was swift and decisive. Silas Reed and his men were arrested, the children were freed, and the evidence Jack and Brewer had gathered became the foundation for prosecutions that would eventually span multiple territories. But for Jack, the most important moment came when he saw Eli running across the compound toward him, tears streaming down his face as he embraced the other children he'd been forced to leave behind. "You kept your promise," Eli said, looking up at Jack with eyes that were no longer haunted by fear. "We all kept our promises," Jack replied, watching as Clara Bennett and other volunteers began the process of caring for the rescued children and helping them find their way back to families or into loving homes. 6 months later, Jack Callahan was no longer the loner cowboy. He'd settled in Dodge City, working with Clara and Marshal Brewer to establish a home for children who needed a safe place to heal and grow. Eli had become like a son to him, and together they were building something that neither had thought possible: family. The child trafficking network had been dismantled, its leaders imprisoned, and dozens of children had been reunited with families or placed in genuine loving homes. The story had made national headlines, leading to reforms in orphanage oversight and child welfare laws. But on quiet evenings, when Jack sat on the porch of the children's home watching Eli and the other kids play in the yard, he thought about the little girl who had reminded him so much of his own daughter. She had been reunited with an aunt in Missouri, and her letters were filled with joy and hope. Jack had learned that sometimes the best way to heal from loss was to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. He'd found his purpose not in running from his past, but in using it to build a better future for children who needed someone to fight for them. The wind still blew across the Kansas prairie, but now it carried the sound of children's laughter instead of secrets and fear. And Jack Callahan, no longer alone, had finally found his way home. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.